Russia continues to carve up Ukraine. Ukraine continues to be in disbelief, continues to claim that that's not happening, that they're in a driver's seat, that they can actually move things down a path that they want. That, of course, has to always go back to what is the ground truth, and we're going to talk about that today. Now, I know a lot of you are expecting Stanislav Krupivnik, who we're having some technical difficulties getting on. If we can bring him back, we will do so. But if we're not able to, we're going to go ahead and go forward, because I know a lot of you are really interested in the subject matter today. And believe me, we've got a lot to talk about. And let's just start off with Putin and Gerasimov actually came on television today in Russia and made a pretty big direct statement.
Освобожден город Северск. Группировка войск «Центр» осуществляет уничтожение окруженных формирований противника восточнее перешедшего под наш полный контроль Красноармейска.
The enemy expected us to get bogged down there, to get stuck there, but they failed miserably, and you succeeded in everything you planned. Congratulations.
Okay, now that's a pretty big issue. That's the city of Seversk. Yet another one has fallen, and that's on the heels of last week, where Russia had announced that they had taken both Kupiansk and Pokrovsk. Interestingly enough, when the announcement came out that the city of Pocrovsk had been taken, as you've been noticing from the time we've been talking about this all the way through, I mean, we've literally been tracking this from the beginning. So for many, many, many months, especially as it turned into more of a focus on the Russian side, we pointed out how much is incrementally. We showed you the map as it went, bit by bit, neighborhood by neighborhood, periods of time where there was no progress, a couple of times where there were counterattacks by the Ukraine side and it moved it back, but then it continued to move forward, and then the Russians took it. Now, interestingly, in the West, when Vladimir Putin announced that Picrosk had been taken, most of the Western media said, well, Russia claims that they have taken it. And as it turns out, that the Ukraine side went much further than just saying, no, that's not the case. They actually said they're still in control of Pokrovsk. Hard to believe. Here's how Syrskyi put it.
The situation at the moment is as follows. The northern part of Pokrovsk remains under our control, and we're gradually advancing deeper into the city. At the same time, the enemy is actively attacking from the south. In other words, the north is held by us, while the southern part is, let's say, enemy's offensive zone. First of all, if you remember, the defense of Pokrovsk has been holding, and the enemy has been attacking the city intensively for 16 months already. They first publicly claimed they would capture Pokrovsk by a stated deadline of September 30th last year in 2024, and every month the deadline kept shifting. And yet Pokrovsk is still under our control.
Yeah, but is Picrosk still under control? Now, listen, I'll show this not just to mock the other side, but to kind of show a continuing pattern. Who do you believe when they say certain things? What do the claims made by different sides? And listen, Russia has said things in the past that turned out not to be true. We've called that out. One of the things you may recall at the very beginning of this, in the weeks leading up to the actual invasion in February 2022, they kept saying over and over, we're not going to invade anybody. We don't have these forces out here to invade anybody. And then, of course, they did. So you can't take anything at face value, but you do have to look at patterns. And you say something, what does it look like on the ground? So you see here that Russia said a week or so ago, I want to say it was on the December the 4th, if I'm not mistaken, 4th or 5th, Russia said we have taken Picrosk. Okay, now you have Syrskyi, I think on the next day, said, no, we're still in control of Pokrovsk. Well, let's take a look at the map here and see what we can actually see. This is, let's zoom in first of all on Pokrovsk. And you see it is all in the red here. And this is matched pretty close with what the Institute for the Study of War shows. And as you know, they're super pro-Ukrainian. They'll interpret anything all day long into the Russians' favor, Ukraine's favor. But they're also pretty accurate on the map, and their maps are pretty similar to this one here that we get from the Military Summary Channel. And as you see, even the Myrnohrad areas continue to shrink further and further. It's totally surrounded. This is a suicide mission that the Ukraine side has sent its troops into. I told you in the weeks leading into this moment, I kept showing you the map and I said, listen, it looks like Ukraine is doing some attacks. And I said at the time up in Rodinska, up in this area here, I said, I hope that they're trying to open up a path to get the troops out of here so that they can move them into safety and get them into other prepared positions back here where they're not cut off. But as it turned out, no, they didn't. They were just trying to push the Russians back here on its own value, apparently. Plus, they also didn't succeed. But even when the path was open, Ukraine refused to move its troops out. Interestingly, also in that same conversation that I showed you there from Syrskyi, this is just this past Monday, he said in there that they don't keep their troops in places that have no military value, and they don't hold them there beyond what is of military necessity. And yet here you have point A right in front of you. That they did exactly what they just claimed he doesn't do again. And there's many of these. And so now then when you see Putin and Gerasimov say that Seversk has been taken, who are you going to believe? You're going to believe the guy that says we're still in control of Pocrovsk as they watch their troops in Myrnohrad be squeezed to death? Or the guy who said that they took Pocrovsk, and now here you see it. Now, to be clear, there are still clashes. I saw even as of this morning, there were some clashes here where it looked like the Russians were moving forces through Pokrovsk to try to continue to move up here in this Hernishnia, in this town, where it looks like that's the next place they're continuing to push on forward from that. And the Ukraine side had an effective attack with some drones on some of the Russian mechanized forces that were moving through the town to try to get up into this area. So the attacks do continue. Of course, that's endemic and everywhere in the front line, but the lines themselves continue to move forward. Obviously, as the lines move forward, then the areas further and further to the south continue to be more stable. But let's see that that's not the only place. So let's actually run back down here to the Zaporizhia area. You see, if you've been watching our show here, you see that this is continuing to expand. It wasn't just a month or so ago that this was all in the yellow and that there was a little sliver up the coastline here. And now you see that that has been expanded considerably up in these areas here. And now the gray zone has been expanded considerably. So Russia continues to move now in the direction of Zaporizhia into the city. And it could be within a few months, this could also be threatened. But you see, the point is that Russia is advancing forward and they're continuing to carve up Ukraine all along the front lines. They are also obviously in visual range of Orkhiv down here. Huliopolya, this is additional. This isn't just the last 12 hours. Russia continues to advance forces now into the city. They had been around this and moving the gray zone closer, both north and south of the city. Now then they're physically into the interior of it. And it's now only a matter of time before they cut this into parts and they move forward here, because Ukraine doesn't have reinforcements. They don't have the fire brigade that they had earlier, where when there was a penetration, they could move them up forward. And now then you see that continues along the line. The Russians have some of these smaller here in Udachna, for example. There's additional movement here. So you see that the Russians aren't giving the Ukraine side relief anywhere. And if you're thinking about moving troops from some of these, relatively less active zones and to move them somewhere else, you see then Russia makes that an active zone. And so that's part of what Russia's doing. There's the Myrnohrad area, but you need to move up south, north of that, and you see everywhere you look, the gray zone is going further and further into Ukraine. Konstantinivka, that's one of the other ones we've been talking about a lot. You see that even up north of that, they've extended this area to the north, this penetration up in here. Now then they've turned the gray zone in this area, and then they're continuing to move up further even into the city itself. Probably within the next day or two, a lot of this gray zone will turn to the red as it will be under Russian control, and the gray zone will be extended further into the city of Konstantinivka. Let's continue to move up beyond that, and you see there, here's a couple of area here in the let's see, I think this is in the Liman direction. You see a couple of big penetrations here where so the Ukraine troops that are in this area here around Liman, Russia is moving both to the south and to the north. Again, within the last 12 hours, these are pretty substantial movements forward. And you see this is going on down here, and this is in Seversk. This is where Russia has, this is what he was talking about, Putin and Gerasimov, that they now say that the city is taken. Now, according to this map anyway, there's still a few outskirts that Ukraine still has some possession of that haven't been cleared, but you see the city as a whole is virtually under Russian control. And again, this whole path here was just from last night. and we can continue going up the road here. There has been some issues, by the way, I will say, in Kupiansk, where the Ukraine side has conducted a fairly effective counterattack and has moved Russians back and is causing some real problems in the Kupiansk area. Interestingly, this map shows the Ukraine side having a lot more success than some of the other maps, to include the Institute for the Study of War, which still shows most of this under Russian control. But nevertheless, there is some pretty significant counterattacks going on by the Ukraine side. But watch this area, because it's going to play out like every other time that the Ukraine side had a counterattack where they had some tactical success. They don't have the staying power, and Russia does have the ability to reinforce it with additional troops. They've got literally hundreds of thousands that are not even in contact, and you can be counting on this will then come back again to red here in the near future. And then we go up into the Kharkiv area. That continues to move south. You remember when Volchansk was just a partial under Russian control less than 3-4 weeks ago? That's now all in Russian control, and it's continuing to move further south up there as well. And the Dnipropetrovsk area, also down in the south, that was part of what I showed you a second ago. That continues to move more in the Russian favor as well, into a new outright region there. That's not even part of what Russia's talking about, and yet they're moving into that area. Everywhere you look, the Russians are still in Sumy. So Sumy, Kharkiv, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and of course now into Dnipropetrovsk. All of these places, Russia continues to move forward. So while you hear the Syrskys and some of these others saying that no, everything is not going Russia's way. In fact, their Russian economy is wobbling. We keep showing you some of those. The Ukraine side claims we're still in control of Pokrovsk. It's absurd at the face value, not hard to realize exactly what's going on there. When even the pro-Ukraine side are admitting, yeah, we've lost Pokrovsk. It's obvious. Myrnohrad, it doesn't matter if you still have troops there. They're surrounded, so it's a certainty that they're lost. Whether they can continue to fight there, I mean, they're going to run out of ammunition, weapons, everything else. You can only provide so much resupply via drones. Those drones are getting shot down, and whatever you can get in, it's just not that much. And of course, all the stuff you're seeing here on the air, that continues on too. In addition to the front line, where Russia is just pounding more and more across the country. This was one of the largest ever, somewhere up near 700 total drones, decoys, and also the missiles. Ukraine claims to have shot down a large portion of them. I have my doubts. It doesn't matter what the reality is. It doesn't matter what anybody reports. It only matters what's actually getting through, and you see the physical evidence in front of you right there. So you can claim whatever you want, but again, what matters is what's true on the ground, and these things continue going on. Interestingly, also, very important, as a matter of fact, in terms of what's been happening here with this drone attacks last night, there was a report out from the Ukraine side 2 days ago that said there is a major threat to the energy and electric system and the heating system in the country. They said that we could probably only survive a few more of these hits, and we're going to completely lose the capacity. They said right now we're already in some major cities, to include Kyiv. There are some sections that are out of power 11 hours per day. Some other sections are even more so of the country. They don't get a lot of media attention, certainly not in the West, because that's not very polite to show and not something that it supports the narrative. But the people on the ground are living it. They're not living a narrative. They're living what's actually true. And if the report that there are only 2 or 3 more of these they can support and sustain before they run out of any kind of spare parts, or that they can even piece them together, because you got to understand, already every time they come in and they have these big hits, the Ukraine side and their engineers are doing amazing, fantastic, just heroic work off the front lines to make these hits minimize the damage and to try and recover some of the capacity so that they can turn the power on for some period of time, have heat and electricity for some periods of time. But they're warning that there's not enough spare parts in Europe to even have. A lot of these things are from the Soviet era, and they just don't make a lot of these spare parts. And Russia is just methodically destroying them, because that destroys their capacity to wage war at the national level. That's why Russia's going after them. And it looks like that they are literally close to the breaking point. And once that happens, I mean, your factories, whatever you have, can't function. You can't move troops and supplies and everything else, even up to the front. Even that becomes really difficult. So everywhere you want to look, in all of these cases, you see more and more difficulty for the Ukraine side, no matter how much Volodymyr Zelensky goes abroad and talks about how they are demanding that Russia accede to their demands for a complete and total and unconditional ceasefire, or that they will not even talk about peace until they get security guarantees. And of course, that's backed up by the European side. They're saying over and over, folks, you know what? We're going to demand that Putin do what we say. His economy was teetering, already on the edge. All we got to do is just keep pushing a little bit further. Russians are suffering 1,000 to 1,200 killed in action per day. This continues to be put forth, even though there's no actual evidence, even though there's none of that. You had Syrskyi earlier this week in that same interview that I showed you, actually says that his process, his strategy, meaning the intent, is to keep on wearing down Russia. And so he wants to get into an attrition battle, the smaller with the gargantuan. And you actually intend to try to wear them down when they haven't even gone to a forced mobilization. They did one small one in 2022 and none since, because they haven't had to. They can recruit people to come in at the requisite numbers, and their casualties, because they have adopted a go slow approach, which prioritizes firepower and minimizes the risk to their troops, they're not losing that many troops. It's a complete fiction, no truth to it whatsoever, and it's false comfort on our side to think, yeah, Russians losing that many, all we got to do is just keep enough of those days piling up, and then all of a sudden what? That's part of the problem. And one of the things that really irks me, if I'm just being honest, is because there's not even any intellectual effort put into what all of these European leaders that are allegedly intelligent people, they're not even pretending to paint a path and to show a picture of how you can get there, meaning that you can wear down Russia. You can't say, okay, Russia has about 1.5 million active troops, and they have at a minimum reserves of around 3 million that they could mobilize if they had to. And so we've got over on this side somewhere around 500,000-600,000, maybe 700,000, depending on who you want to talk to, maybe 300,000, depending on some other reports. Who knows? Whatever. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. It's 700,000. 700,000 by 1.5 million with 3 million in reserve that can be mobilized if they need to. And to forget about the additional millions that can be force mobilized if it gets to that. So your plan, with now a handful of million total people, not even just military age people, not even just folks who are military capable, but just people, period, that you have to, as a potential recruit here, you know, you're bleeding them like crazy, like to the tune of about 500,000 this year alone in desertions, people who have fled. That's not even counting how many are actually killed and wounded. And you're not able to force recruit even close to being enough to offset the losses piled up from all of these sources here. And that's what you want to predicate your actual strategy, meaning you're doing it on purpose. It's as irrational as it sounds, folks. There's no truth to it. There's no possibility of success. And yet, this is where we are right now, and it's about to get a lot worse. If you think everything I've shared with you up to this point is bad, holy smokes, wait till you see what's coming worse, because this dysfunction and this lack of logic on the Western side has the potential to get us all sucked into another war. If you think I'm exaggerating, let's take a look at this. First of all, let's take a look at Trump, because it could be that Trump is actually distancing himself from some of this insanity, especially from the West. And I've showed you earlier this week about Macron, about Friedrich Merz, about Keir Starmer, Maloney, all these folks, and certainly Mark Rutte and a bunch of others in NATO, European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, et cetera. They're still all singing the same tune of we're going to demand this and that. Trump is now starting to go, I'm not completely sure. I'm not sold on this. And in fact, comments saying that he recognizes that maybe the Ukraine side needs to stop pretending like they're a democracy and actually hold an election and be one.
You said in an interview yesterday that you think it's time for Zelensky to start accepting things. What things are you talking about?
I think he has to be realistic, and I do wonder about, how long is it going to be till they have an election? It's a democracy. It's a long time. They haven't had an election in a long time. It's losing a lot of people. But they do have a massive corruption situation going on there, and they do say, when are they? People are asking this question: when do they have an election? Are they going to have an election, or are they going to just keep it going like this? So I think it's time to get that war settled. And I think it's a war that can be settled. But it takes two to tango.
Yeah. In some cases, it doesn't really take two to tango. It really takes one to tango. And that is the 800-pound gorilla in President Trump. Because whatever all these European leaders, and I mean all the ones I just mentioned there, whatever they're all as a group saying, they're still about 50 pounds. Trump is still the 800-pound gorilla. He can just dictate how this is going to go. Let's be honest. He can. He hasn't so far. And I worry a little bit about that because he's made a lot of comments over, I mean, we can go all the way back to February, the end of February this year when they had the big blow up in the Oval Office with Zelensky. That was his golden opportunity to just say, this is not going to work. Or in April, when Rubio say, we are days from walking away. If we can't get the two sides together, we're going to walk away, et cetera. He didn't do it. He was right then. He was right in February. He was right then, and yet he didn't do it. So one, you have to take with a grain of rock salt whether he's going to do it this time. But he does seem to be saying, hey, I'm recognizing what's going on the ground. This whole thing about no elections ever, I mean, when is that ever going to change? You know, you call yourself a democracy. Russia had an election during the war, same year that Zelensky was supposed to. Vladimir Putin did. And you know what? You can say, oh, well, that wasn't a real election because Putin, just fill in the blank, because we don't accept anything from the Russian side as being valid. But even if you wanted to go down that path, then you should be able to, by extension, to say, well, then Zelensky should have done the same thing. It would have been hard too. It would have been harder because part of his identity is occupied. No question about that. But you can do it. We did it, the United States, in our civil war. When half of our country was split apart, we still had elections. So you don't tell me he couldn't have done it, because he could. He chose not to because it's easier. So Zelensky is not a democracy. He's not a democratic country. He's right now, he is an autocratic leader. However you want to pretend otherwise, the facts are he could end martial law and have an election. He's chosen not to. In light of what Trump has said here, this is the second time he said that. Of course, Zelensky is going, yeah, sure, I'll have an election within 60 to 90 days. We'll do it quickly, as long as you give me what I want, which is the unconditional ceasefire, which he knows is a poison pill that Russia would never, under any circumstances, agree to, because they continue to say it. So Zelensky knows that if he'll put this caveat and this requirement on top of it, then he knows it'll never happen. Okay. If we're just playing with words, then that could be an effective strategy. That's when we go back to this 800-pound gorilla situation, because Trump should say, that's stupid. Do you think I'm stupid? Because I'm not falling for that. I'm not going to contemplate that. You're just, blah, 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 making words and trying to stop the 800-pound gorilla with a word. I hope he's not successful. Now, there's one other indication from that same interview with Trump where maybe Trump is getting ready to actually act on it, when instead of talking about a negotiated settlement, he said this.
We said before we go to a meeting, we want to know some things. They would like us to go to a meeting over the weekend in Europe, and we'll make a determination depending on what they come back with. We don't want to be wasting time. Sometimes you have to let people fight it out, and sometimes you don't. But the problem with letting people fight it out is you're losing thousands of people a week.
Sometimes you just have to let them fight it out. Sometimes you have to have an election when you don't want one. So Trump could be, and so far he has literally laid out the groundwork to say, we're going to walk away. Remember, Monday in Doha, his son, Don Jr., was point blank asked, could Trump walk away? And he said, he could. You're thinking about my dad, you don't know what he's going to do, blah, blah. So he immediately put a caveat on it, but he didn't say no. He didn't say, no, I'm not going. He said he might. You don't know what he's going to do. So the groundwork has been laid. That Trump can say, and golly, I know that he's going to take a lot of heat if he does this. There's no question about it, because you see, I showed you Jack Keane on Fox News is constantly saying we need to do a bunch of stuff. Lindsey Graham, his golfing buddy, is constantly saying we need to do more stuff for Ukraine and don't give anything to Putin, et cetera. So he's got a lot of headwinds on his inner circle even. There's no question about that. But there is a rational path to play. And if he's willing to exert his 800-pound gorilla-ness, he can say, I am not going to underwrite failure anymore. We've done everything that we could. We have tried everything. We have tried diplomacy. We've tried to get Europe and Ukraine on the same side and to get at least in the same mind with us to have a negotiated settlement. Y'all refuse to do it. I don't have any leverage over Russia. I'm trying to get them to do stuff. I've offered some incentives and probably could get them to negotiate away a few things that they want on the margins. That's probably the best that we can do. There is some leverage with that, but not much. And certainly not any on the core issues for the Russians, which Putin talks about all the time. So we've tried it all. This is what Trump can say, but none of it's worked. Russia hasn't moved off of its core issues. Ukraine and Europe have not moved off of their core positions. The battlefield keeps moving further to the west, as I keep showing you. Cities are now falling one right after the other. You're running out of troops. The likelihood is that the losses start accelerating in 2026 for a number of very practical, predictable reasons. I'm not going to underwrite this anymore. Unfortunately, the National Defense Authorization Act that just passed, the NDAA, it includes a couple of portions for, I think, like $800 million for Ukraine. So that's kind of sending mixed signals as well. Of course, in the course of a war, $800 million is not much at all. It's not going to do much of anything. And I doubt hardly any of that would actually get to the front anyway. But what Trump can say was, yeah, we ain't doing that either. Let's scrub that out of the NDAA. We're going to be done. We're stopping. And you can even say, we're stopping at this date here. We're going to let it run through X date, some number of months, and say it will end hard stop on this date here. That gives you time at current levels of support to come to the best negotiated deal that you and the Europeans can agree to with Russia. We'll facilitate if we want, but really, it's between y'all. Y'all figure this out because you're the ones who have to live with it. But we're not going to underwrite it anymore because it is a guaranteed fail. And I'm not going to put the credibility of the United States, the money of the United States, and the risk that we could get drawn into a war on something that is a guaranteed loss. Pull your businessman deal out of this. 800-pound gorilla businessman. I mean, it works. We're not going to underwrite success. So we're going to stop here. We're going to be responsible and give you guys time to get this figured out. But if you refuse, if you say we're not going to take this opportunity, we're not going to have an election, we're not going to go back and acknowledge reality on the ground and seek a negotiated settlement, then you will be on your own. And that will be your choice. It will not be mine. It will be your responsibility. It will be on your dime. It will be on your shoulders. And history will look to you because I'm telling you, and I'm telling everybody in the world right now, here is a path that we will support and no further. If you choose of your own volition, and I'm not going to force you, that you're not going to take the offer that I've got on the table, then you are assuming responsibility for everything that follows after it. And I know that you will do everything in your power to throw the responsibility back onto us, and there will be so many people that will do that. Those will be words, and you can do whatever you want. It's a free world. You can say whatever you want to say, and even if it's untrue, you've been really good at saying things that aren't true, so be it. I am not going to go, because to listen to you and to be swayed by your inaccurate and untrue words, all I'm going to do is deepen the cost on the Ukrainian people, and I'm still not going to change the outcome. Russia will still win. That's the painful part of this, is that if Trump doesn't do this, if he doesn't use his 800-pound gorillaness, then he's not going to change the outcome. It's still going to happen, except for now, then the cost is just going to be so much higher on the West at large, and definitely on the Ukraine people specifically. That, my friend, is the hardcore truth that we ignore to their peril. But as it turns out, there's also potential for our own peril. And I said at the outset that this is not just another, eye-rolling kind of day where the West is disconnected from reality. Unfortunately, we're now going beyond what we had, ones that are even bigger time negative. And that is, we're talking about the possibility of war with Russia. You think that I'm exaggerating here. You think I'm saying something that's untrue. First of all, here is a comment from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. And by the way, I'm going to show you one clip of this here. He had a very profound whole speech. And I'm going to cover it this afternoon at I think between 3 and 3:30 p.m. Yeah, we're going to cover this. And I'm going to go bit by bit to show you how incredibly dangerous and irresponsible this statement was. But he is basically laying this out to saying and threatening Russia that we're going to get ready for war with you, and strongly implying that we may even go offensive. And if you're Russia, there's no way you're going to come about it. Here is one of the key statements he said today, which should be alarming to everybody in the West.
Conflict is at our door. Russia has brought war back to Europe. And we must be prepared for the scale of war our grandparents and great-grandparents endured.
Really? We need to be ready for World War II. That's what he's talking about, the greatest generation. Why do we need to be ready for a war with Russia? Russia has been saying, Putin says all day long, he mocks us for saying we're coming after him. And then you have this weird dichotomy that is contradicted at the highest level. You have Emmanuel Macron. Remember, we showed you maybe a couple of months ago, month and a half, something like that, to where he was mocking Putin and saying, all he's taken is 1% of the territory in the last year and a half. Why are we worried about that? Let's see, General Jack Keane, same thing. I've shown you several times where he mocks the Russians. They can't even take more than 1%. Then why are you worried about them coming to the West? Upon what basis do we need to be ready to fight a World War II, which, listen to me, hear me carefully, you will not fight a conventional war at the level of World War II and it not include nuclear weapons. Somebody's going to pull them out there. That's why we have them. That's why everybody has them, to prevent that kind of a war. And yet here is Mark Rutte lustily advocating for it. He wants to prepare. Now, as it turns out, if you say, well, upon what are they basing this? Well, it's not just in Europe. I wish we could just blame the Europeans. As it turns out, a professor in the U.S. Naval War College went even further.
At the end of the Cold War, when these Soviet satellites can finally slip the leash, I've given you all the reasons why they stampede into NATO. It is not NATO tricking them to join. They're stampeding in for excellent reasons. They've been proven right. And then with Putin, when he works his magic the second time around in Ukraine in 2022, this is when the Finns and the Swedes decide neutrality is not going to cut it. We got to join NATO. But when Putin looks at this, he goes, oh, they're coming at us in arcs. Well, this is ludicrous. Russia has posed an existential threat to these places forever. No one today wants to invade Russia. Who'd want it? It's full of Russians. We want them to stay home, right?
Yeah. So Vladimir Putin is he's just making this stuff up. And he said, oh, all these waves are coming. No, they have been an existential threat, she says, from the beginning. But have they? From the beginning? So after 1991, after 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved and their Navy was a rust bucket everywhere they were in port, they couldn't even get the ships out. Their army was a complete disaster and a mess. They couldn't fight their way out of Grozny, for example. They had a hard time doing that. They had an even harder time even in 2008 against a couple of provinces of the tiny country of Georgia. They had to really expend a lot of combat power just to take to limit the damage on this one little thing here. Putin had been saying since 2007, we have no interest in you. We actually are interested in joining NATO. We're interested in joining to have a European-wide security architecture. And we said no. So yeah, we're not interested in that, but we'll kind of have some association with you. But by the way, while we're having this association, we're going to keep moving further and further to the east. We're going to get closer and closer to your border. And so in 2007, Putin said, this is not leading to European integration and stability. In 2008, when NATO said that we're going to go to Ukraine and to Georgia, and Russia said, that's a red line. Don't do that. And then they showed that it was a red line with Georgia that year. And then they continued to warn about Ukraine. Meanwhile, NATO continued to go up on the door. And at no point in this did Russia represent an existential threat to anyone. To the contrary, they kept on working from a position of weakness, I might add. that they were trying to find some cooperation with the West, but because we were in the superiority position, militarily and economically especially, we just ignored them and did whatever we wanted to do. But you see, you'd never know any of that if you're just listening to this professor. That's still a professor at the U.S. Naval War College. That's one of the people who's teaching our future leaders. They're not hearing what you're hearing right now. All they're hearing is that this, you have all these graphics on there and a map and cool stuff and just showing it moving to the ironically, it does show it moving to the east, but saying, oh, this is all Russia's fault, etc. Bear in mind also, it's important to point out at this point in her story that as of 21 February 2014, at that time, Ukraine and Kyiv was in charge of the entire country, to include Crimea. All of it was in their power. There was a deal made on that day that would have made sure that it stayed the case. There would have been new elections after the Maidan issue. All of it would have stayed under Kyiv control. But no, we can't have that. So we supported the overthrow of the legally elected government, but we didn't like that legally elected government because it was leaning toward the east. It was leaning towards Moscow. Even though we had a democratic path to fix that, we didn't want to wait for democracy. We decided to seize it. And so we supported the overthrow of that government without having elections. And then that spawned a civil war. At that point, in March of that year, then and only then did Russia annex the Crimean Peninsula. And I'm not going to rehash all of that, but that's where it started. And then, of course, even as late as 2021, I think October 2021, Putin again told then NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg, if you keep moving NATO into Ukraine, if you don't take it off the table, it's going to mean war. But if you take it off the table, then there won't be any conflict. That's what he told us. That's what we acknowledge. We have admitted that. That's not speculation. That's not me trying to rewrite anything. That's me quoting the terms of Jens Stoltenberg. And I believe it was October 2023 is when he announced that. We've shown it to you several times on this show. Now, how does that match with what you just heard from Mark Rutte, who's talking about we have to get ready for war with Russia, and to this Naval War College professor who's saying that Russia is the bad guy. They've done all of this stuff. We didn't do anything. And they're an existential threat. They've always been when they clearly haven't been. So when you keep talking like this is going back to the law of consequences. You can take actions, and if you think that something is in your benefit, you can do it as long as, and even if you don't acknowledge it, but you must be aware that there are consequences to actions. If your works succeed and it suppresses the other side, it causes them to go back down, then you might have something positive on your side. But you have to also acknowledge, but it could also have the contrary result. It could also be that you take some action and the counteraction could be higher on the other side. And whatever condition you sought to improve here to make it better for your side, less stressful for your side, less threatening for your side, could actually make it more threatening for your side. That's where we are now. Now, we can look at this course of this war by itself, and we can see that the war could have ended in 2022, in April of 2022. And the eventual results of that, if all the terms had been executed that would have been talked about, Russia would have left everywhere, to include the Donbass, all of it militarily, except for Crimea. That was on the table then, but we didn't have it. So we said, no, we don't want that. We want everything. And of course, now there's a less. That's what's happened up to this point. Now here we are. Are we going to do it again, except where it could actually spawn a war between Ukraine, between Europe / United States or NATO and Russia? That's what we're talking about now. Not a minor issue. Russians are not backing down from this stuff. So in light of what Rutte said, in light of what this professor said, here is today, what Sergei Lavrov said, reiterating something that Putin said about a week ago.
I repeat, Russia stands by its word, and we keep our promises. As stated by the president, if Europe decides to wage war, we are ready for that right now.
Now, it's unclear what the first part of what he said meant. When he says we mean what we say, he could be saying one of two things, possibly even both. He could be saying We want a negotiated settlement. We're willing to abide by the terms that we say. We mean what we say. And even though most in the West say, oh, Russia always violates its terms, everything it agrees to, it violates. I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think there's many things that the Russians have abided by, and it's that our side that has not abided to it. But there have been some, and on both sides. I'd say it's more like 60-40, not good on our side from Russia, but it does exist on the other side. That's the case with every agreement that's ever existed in human history. Everything comes down to that. You have to find some kind of trust, or what you leave on the table in the only result that you're allowing the other side is to not even worry about taking anybody's word for anything, and one side just militarily conquers the other. That's what you're leaving the Russian side right now. So I think that what they're saying is, at least it could be, the first part is that we'll keep our word. Let's have a negotiated settlement now that can bring the war to an end today. But then simultaneously, he said, but we also mean what we say on the negative side, which Putin said a week ago. We will attain our objectives either diplomacy or through military means. He further said, Putin did, that if Europe, because this is not the first time Europe has been saying that they're getting ready for war with Russia, if you bring war to us, he said, we'll unleash big war. You may remember that one where he was saying, listen, if you think that what's been going on in the Donbass and all along this, this slow incremental go forward is how wars fought this day, you're mistaken. He said, this is the special military operation, which has very specific rules and applications on the Russian side. But a full-on war is a completely different ballgame, a ballgame that they're equipped for. They have made themselves equipped for over the last 4 years. We have not. So if you're talking about, do we want to get into a tit for tat situation and a potential conflict with Russia, it will not go well for us, my friend. So don't think that there's two equal behemoths here. That would be bad enough, because that would be stupid. Why in the world would you want to go into a situation that could spawn a conflict with, even if you were equal? Why would you want to do that? Because now then that means there's going to be massive loss of life and blood on both sides. On your side, a war that should never be fought, doesn't have to be fought. And if it does, we're all going to lose. Even Russia would lose in that case, because there's a lot of firepower we have on our side. As weak as we are in comparison, that doesn't mean that we're not without substantial power, and we can unleash all kinds of fire on the Russian side, which would cause substantial casualties and damage and loss of life. We just can't sustain it. They can. So if you get into a conventional war, we're screwed. And yet, why are we talking with such cockiness when it shouldn't take but maybe a second lieutenant level or a college sophomore level of understanding of economics and just production capacity to understand that we can't sustain a fight, and we see that they can? Why would you want to do that? I don't know. There's no rational reason, unless it's a bluff. I don't know if that's what the case is, but that's what we're going down here. But you see over and over, we keep going down to this path that says, no, we're going to try and win this. And we're going to get ready for, as Ruta said there a minute ago that I showed you, we're getting ready for a World War II level casualty and a World War II level strike. So he's already trying to drive it into the head that we have a generational struggle ahead of us. And we also showed you, I guess a day or so ago, something that Ruta said earlier this week, but also was a repeat from something in early November, to where he is saying and declaring there's not going to be any improved relations with Russia. Even after this war is over, there is going to be conflict with Russia for the foreseeable future. He is literally cementing in a new Cold War that, God help us if it turns into a hot war. That the previous Cold War didn't turn into a hot war because of the paucity of statesmanship and the propensity of foolishness on the senior ranks across the board in the West. I doubt very seriously we get lucky in another time if we have another Cold War. Somebody's going to make a foolish mistake. Somebody's going to do something stupid. There's going to be an accident, an error somewhere, and then we're going to overreact, and then we're going to be at war. And I'm just telling you, the chances of it staying conventional are really low. The minute missiles start flying back and forth and hitting across anything outside of the borders of Ukraine, from Russia to a NATO, or from a NATO country to Russia, all bets are off. And that's why we are in such a dangerous situation right now. And that's why it is so important for President Trump to be that 800-pound gorilla and finally just say, I don't care what any of you think. I don't care what kind of hatred that people come back to me, whatever kind of complaints they make. This is the only thing that makes any sense. And this, you talk about an America first policy, this is it. We're going to take action that's going to keep us out of a war. If Europe wants to get into this suicidal situation, to get into a war of decision and choice with Russia, I think it would be foolish and bad for the world, but y'all do whatever you're going to do. Don't drag us into it. Don't cause Americans to have to pay in blood and potentially our country in destruction of some of the stuff on our soil. We won't survive this untouched, folks. Understand this. This ain't going to be World War II where all of it's going to happen on the European soil. If we get dragged into a war and we don't stop this and we get part of it and there's a conflict that we're involved with, you can count on that some of Russia's missile forces are going to hit our soil. And of course, that's why the threat of nuclear war will just go through the roof, because we may not know if an Oreshnik is coming to a factory, on the U.S. East Coast. Are we going to assume it's a non-nuclear? Or are we going to assume it's a nuclear, even if it isn't? Are we going to fire back something like that? You see, the chances are just through the roof. Don't get into that point. It would be foolish to the highest degree to even play with this. It's time for President Trump to do his 800-pound gorilla action, get us out of this, and let the Europeans commit suicide if they so choose. I pray to God they don't, but don't get us dragged down in the process. We are going down a path that cannot succeed and will not produce anything of value for our side under the best of circumstances. That's where we are, folks. I'm going to come back to you about 3:30 this afternoon. I'm going to go into that speech so you can see exactly what we're talking about and why the whole thing, more than the one soundbite, it's really, really dangerous what we're doing right now. Also, as a reminder here, we are on podcast now. I know a lot of people like to get podcast and you can, watch it or listen to it on the go. Whatever it takes, folks, get information here, because we are going to be unintimidated and uncompromised. You are not hearing this message anywhere else, folks. You're going to hear it right here. Share the knowledge here. Share the wealth so other people have access to the same thing you do, so that we have a chance to bring sanity back into the conversation before it's too late. Thanks, folks, and I'll see you at 3:30 today on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.